training video, I will show you how to write subject lines that will ensure the reader opens and reads your email. And I'll show you how to begin the email so that you're more likely to have a positive impact on the reader and get the response you want. The subject line often determines how quickly the reader will read and respond to the email. Use the subject line as a valuable tool in your strategy to communicate successfully with the reader. Your goal is to make sure your email is read and the reader responds as you expect. The subject line is the first part of your strategy to write emails that have impact. Always write a subject line. It should contain words that fit your email. If you're replying back and forth, make sure the subject stays relevant to what's in the email. When the email subject changes, change the subject line. Make sure that the subject line reflects the objectives you have for the email. If the goal of your email is to inform, state the central message in a few words. Choose the key terms that the reader will understand immediately. If you're responding to a request, include the key terms that were in the request. If the goal of your email is to get an action or to stop an action, state the action that must begin or must stop in the subject line. Your company might have action in all caps and then the subject of the email. That lets the reader know that he or she must read this email to learn what the action is and when it must begin or stop. If the goal of your email is to provide reference material the reader will have to retrieve later, make sure that the first key term is one the reader might think of when looking through an alphabetical list of email messages, so he or she can retrieve it later. If you want to persuade or have the reader respond to an appeal, in the subject line write what is of interest to the reader or benefits the reader will receive if the results of the email come about. If the contents are very important and have a time constraint, you may state that in the subject line. In all caps, important, results of the test. In all caps, response needed by 5 today. But use such appeals infrequently. If you use them regularly, people will learn to disregard them when they come from you. And as always, if you need something quickly, pick up the phone and call, at least to say, you'll receive my email in a few minutes and here's what I need and when I need it. Since most emails are brief, subject lines can be 2 to 5 words. You do not need full sentences. Don't put the email's message in the subject line, and don't begin the message in the subject line and continue it in the body of the email. Use the subject line just for a short statement of the subject of the email. Use the key term for the subject in the first 3 words. The key term is the word or phrase that is the most accurate word or phrase for the subject. Capitalize words that normally should be capitalized, such as the first letters of month names or I for yourself. Occasionally, you might capitalize an entire word for emphasis, but do so only if you have an unusually good reason to do so. Capitalizing loses its impact if you capitalize many words, and words in all caps are more difficult to read. Make sure your grammar and spelling are correct. If you're combining 2 different ideas, you might use a combiner to join them. For example, a subject line such as meeting date +, project guidelines, tells the reader what the message will contain with a minimum number of words. However, don't use these combiners in the text of the email. Manage the reader right from the beginning of your email. You will be most successful if you give the reader everything he or she needs to understand perfectly, starting with the first words. Open with a courteous salutation. You may use the standard "Dear" if you don't know the reader well. Use proper titles like Mr. or Ms. if the email is going to someone you don't know. But the trend in emails to people the writer knows is to begin with a natural conversational opening such as "Hello, Jim," or "Good morning, Frida." Address the individual by name. If the email is going to several people, write the reader's names unless the list is too long. Try not to use a general term like department or all staff or everyone. Always introduce yourself if the reader doesn't know you. That lets the reader know you're someone worth listening to, and it builds a feeling of partnering with the reader. You will be most successful if the reader feels you're working together. If you're writing to a customer, state your name, position, and if relevant, your duties in the company. In the example, the writer knows Bob, so she doesn't introduce herself. Next, explain why the reader is receiving this now. Even if this resulted from a phone call or you're sure the reader will remember why you wrote this email, remind the reader of what is behind it. That saves the reader time in trying to figure out why he or she is receiving this now. And it gives the reader a feeling that you're on top of things. It looks good for you and your organization. Don't include too much detail, just enough to remind the reader. State the action or the most important point close to the beginning. It might come after you explain why the reader is receiving this now, or after you tell the reader what to do with this email. You decide whether you have to have something of importance to write here, however. You don't have to include a statement of importance with every email. Let the reader know what to do with the information. If the content is for reference only, state that. Write, "This information is for you to have as reference in case this situation arises in the future." If the reader should use the information to prepare for a discussion, state that. Use this information to prepare ideas for the product development meeting on Tuesday. Include a buffer if necessary. If you know the email message may have a negative impact, begin with the most positive tone appropriate. In the example, the writer is assuring the reader that this action won't interfere with her plans to add another employee. State what is in the remainder of the email. You should be able to summarize any email you send in 1 or 2 sentences. If you have trouble doing so, it may be a sign that your email is too long or it rambles. Write more than 1 sentence if necessary describing the contents. Then decide whether all is relevant to your message. If your email contains more than 1 point, list the points when you state the contents. These are the important points that result in clear subject lines and effective introductions to emails. Write a subject line for every email that fits your objectives. Convey the message's importance in the subject line. Open with a salutation and introduce yourself if the reader doesn't know you. Remind the reader of the reason for this email. Let the reader know what he or she is to do with the information. State what is in the remainder of the email, listing the main points if there's more than 1. If you follow the guidelines in this video, you will be able to write subject lines and openings for your emails that ensure readers will open them and read them with understanding.